All right. So George Galloway apparently is in exile. He's going to wind up writing his greatest novels now from Paris. He went on with Tucker Carlson to explain how his detention at the airport made him decide just to leave and not come back for a while. This is, and by the way, there's kind of an interesting element of this. It's really, according to Galloway, this is not a Palestine thing. This is a Ukraine thing. He's been elected to parliament 7 times. He's one of the most conservative politicians on many issues in the UK. This is Tucker. But when he criticized the Ukraine war, he was detained by British police and had his property confiscated. He's now in exile.
In the city of London right now, I'm an American. You're a citizen of the country I'm sitting in, but you're not in this country. You're in another country. Why are you there, and when are you coming back?
Well, it's a long and difficult story. It started last month when my good wife and I were detained but not arrested by the anti-terrorism police at Gatwick Airport in London. Now, ponder that piece of Kafkaesque framing. You are not under arrest, but you are not free to leave, they said. These pistol-packing anti-terrorist cops. They said you have no right to silence, and if you refuse to answer any of our questions, you will automatically be guilty under the Terrorism Act of an act in defiance of that very serious act. And the policeman joked, good luck ever getting on an airplane again. Now, to complete the framing, I'm 71 years old, 7 times elected Member of Parliament, a member of the British Parliament across 5 decades, the leader of a British political party, the biggest broadcaster in Britain, not nearly as big as you, but the biggest British broadcaster in Britain, broadcasting to the largest audience every single week. I'm one of the best known people in the country, and I've got armed anti-terrorist police telling me I'm not under arrest, but I am not free to leave. And of course, it quickly turned out that the purpose of the pool, the detention, was speech. My podcasts, my broadcasts, my tweet output, my Facebook output. That's the Britain that we now have today. And we spent 4 hours in my case, 5 hours in my wife's case, in 2 separate rooms, surrounded by armed police officers, being questioned about our political views. And in my wife's case, her fingernail, which is painted rather nicely in the Palestine colors. Now, if you had told me 8 weeks ago that such a thing was even remotely possible, I would not have believed you. There is no more patriotic British citizen than me. In the last decade, Mr. Carson, I fought 2 major battles for the British state. 2014, The Spectator said, my speeches saved the Union, when Scotland's separatist referendum looked very much like it was going to succeed. And 2016, I was one of the leading figures in the Brexit movement, trying to win Britain's independence. And so here I am, sitting in a police station in Gatwick Airport with armed men questioning me on my...
And I have personally invested in the only jellied squid restaurant in St. Petersburg. I'll have you know.
My political views. So the trauma of all that, to be honest, being outside of the country is the least of it. If I tell you, and nobody knows this except you and me and whoever watches, it literally broke my heart. I now have a cardiologist. I'm a man who never lost a day through illness at work in my entire life. And now I have a heart condition, arrhythmia, which the consultant cardiologist, a very fine one, tells me is of recent provenance. So you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out that these cops actually broke my heart. Allows the police to seize your documents, seize your telephone, your laptop, seize every.
Now he's talking about how they have expanded rights to search and seize at a port of entry. It's the same in this country, as we'll get into.
Everything. Only at the port. They would need a warrant to do it anywhere else in the country, and they'd be very unlikely to get one in regard to me. But they saw the opportunity of stopping me under that act and divesting me of my whole life. Everything, my parliamentary correspondence, my legal correspondence, my personal family pictures, my political correspondence, the members of my party, the membership list of my party, and they took it. And this is precisely the abuse of the word terrorism that you saw in London yesterday, where old ladies, old men, people in wheelchairs, blind people, are being arrested under the Terrorism Act for holding up a placard, a little piece of cardboard at their breast, and they are being taken away under terrorism charges. This is the nightmare that is Britain.
Yes, Britain is kind of leading the way. We're catching up pretty fast. The First Amendment is a little bit of a problem here, but they're working hard to get around that. There's Johnny Miller, another British journalist who's in exile. So George Galloway has gone into exile. I didn't know, but I'm not surprised. A friend said he was surprised that he was detained as he got off an airplane in London. I wasn't. It was inevitable. When I watch this, it breaks my heart because I want to go home. But I'm under political asylum in Russia because I promoted peace in Europe and British interests. And now I'm scared of the British security state, really scared, because the threats got so bad. MI5, MI6, they are traitors to the British state and to the British people. They have the power to change things, but they just let our country slip away. That whole interview with Galloway is worth checking out. He talks about how it's a topsy-turvy world, as many of us have talked about, that, yeah, man, the most vociferously hawkish people are the liberals now, right? He spoke up about Ukraine. That's who really came after him. The people insofar, look, in the end, in England as here, it's pretty much a uniparty. Most people are pro-war. But when you do find your anti-war voices, it's Thomas Massey, right? It's Marjorie Taylor Greene. Same thing there. And those are the people who really came for him. I understand where he's coming from. If I'm understanding him correctly, basically after that happened to him, when he left the country again, he didn't want to risk coming back over the border, and who knows what they're going to do to him next time. So he just said, you know what? I'm out. I'm just going to stay out. I don't want to risk crossing the border back into the country. Now, you remember J.D. Vance, right after they got elected, he gave that big speech about freedom of speech. He specifically talked about the UK and people praying outside of abortion clinics. And you know what? I agree with all that. I think you should be allowed to do that. We covered stories where they arrested a girl for saying a cop looked like a lesbian. Turned out she was autistic and her own grandmother was a lesbian. They wouldn't listen. Yeah, there was that. There's the crazy woke suppression of speech. But that's all the right wing wants to talk about. It's very interesting because you don't see them saying shit. And this is on Tucker Carlson's show. You don't see them talking about how George Galloway has to live in exile because the UK has gotten so censorious. Why? Because he got censored over Ukraine and over Palestine, so they don't want to talk about that. If he had gotten kicked out because he spoke out about men in the women's locker room, it would be all over X. So this was a few months ago. We covered it at the time. Palestine Action, this is from the Metropolitan Police. Palestine Action has now been proscribed by the UK government, and expressing support for them is a criminal offense. This includes chanting, wearing clothing, or displaying articles such as flags, signs, or logos. And this is where our First Amendment, at least for the time being, gets in the way. You really cannot get a law like that through the courts yet in this country, that you literally cannot express support for a certain organization. Technically, you could express support for hummus. You would have a very hard time trying to make a law like that. I mean, you would have to get the Supreme Court to just not adhere to the First Amendment at all. And even this court, I think, would be unlikely to do that. But yeah, shortly after that, more than 70 protesters across the UK were arrested for holding signs supporting Palestine action, just for holding signs. This happened in September. Here they are, as Galloway was talking about, arresting someone in a wheelchair.
You are arresting somebody on a wheelchair.
How many wheelchair users have you arrested today?
Yeah, it's a real threat there. It's a real threat to public safety there. And of course, they've been on a real war against journalists. Richard Medhurst is still, I believe, under investigation, still under a cloud of prosecution. Sarah Wilkinson, she was arrested twice, I believe. They arrested her twice. But hey, man, Max Blumenthal, he was detained. You're coming back from Nicaragua. They detained him, questioned him, went through his devices. Hassan Piker, this happened to. Pretty famous podcaster, streamer, questioned at the Chicago airport. So, yeah, I mean, they have been trying to take advantage of the fact that at ports, you do not have the protections that you would have otherwise when you're coming through ports of entry. So they're trying to do this as much as they can here. Clearly, we're going through a period where the principle of freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of political affiliation is under assault on all sides. On all sides. I mean, part of the support for Trump came from the intentional misleading they did about their support for those things, right? They attacked. No, we believe that everyone should have the right to open debate, and and the anti-woke thing presented itself as emphatically pro-debate as a cornerstone of Western civilization. After I went to the douchebag dialogues, I saw that was bullshit. I saw that they were very happy to suppress student protesters. At that time, that was really when the Columbia protests were erupting into the news, and they had nothing but disdain and derision for those protesters. So it's pretty predictable that once their faction got into power, they really have no interest in protecting people like Richard Medhurst or Sarah Wilkinson. But then, yeah, when the Democrats were in power, you have AOC talking about how people need to be deplatformed, and but they're, as conditions deteriorate for the peasants, the ruling class has a vested interest in suppressing speech, in convincing people that criticisms of the system are wrongheaded and terroristic, stochastic terrorism, right? They have different language, different ways that they go about it, but the entire ruling class, whether liberal or MAGA or what have you, is engaged in a sustained assault on the freedoms that people in the West have come to take for granted.
Well, yeah, and just like, here, you had, I won't say a huge wave election which brought Trump in, but he did win all of the swing states. If you remember in the last British election, the Labour Party absolutely dominated. I mean, they just crushed. And I just pulled
Right.
this up because this you could see, look at the trend. since 2024. So since the last election, the Labour Party support has plummeted. And now you have the Reform Party actually picking up a lot of that because the
Jeremy
Tories,
Corbyn, right?
well, the Tories are still, very, very unpopular. And so I think the Reform Party is Farage actually, but the Tories are still, dreadfully unpopular. So now you have really a collapse in support of the two major parties there, and it's very similar. I mean, not that the Labor Party ever really. I mean, Keir Starmer, I don't think ever really presented himself as a champion of speech, but you had what's his name, Little Rishi Sunak, go up there and make these horribly dystopian, speeches about how you didn't have a right to project "Stop Bombing Gaza" onto Big Ben.
That was right after I was there. I had my own footage of what they had been projecting on Big Ben, and it was like, stop bombing Palestine. Ooh,
right,
monsters.
And so you had the Labour Party ride in on a wave of discontent over the Tories, and now the Labour Party has just completely collapsed in support because of all this shit that they are doing. Like, it's a really destabilizing situation, and it's just really shocking to see the extent to which, even as they make moves to recognize a Palestinian state, even as they gesture validation of a lot of the critiques that these protesters are making, they are still willing to and keen to terrorize them into silence.
Please clap.